Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Access Granted. It's actually the first one I've done in a while. It's just been super busy. Of course, with high school football, college football, everything in between. Just got to find time to do this. But luckily, I was able to. Since all that's mostly over, I now have time to do it. And what a better way to kick it off with my a good friend Lucas Hill of the College Football Nightcap. He also is a student of the Southeastern, and he's also the color analyst for all sports. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Grant, what's up, man? Good to see you, brother. It was only actually a month ago today we officially met in person.
Yes. And it was the first time we met in person, but I've been on this podcast before, and of course we know of each other because obviously through Jace. I mean, Jace, of course. Jason LeJeune is my co-host for the Friday Nights on the Bayou podcast that we have done throughout the high school football season here in Louisiana. Jace is a Southeastern alum, and Jace often helps out Lucas with a bunch of stuff, giving advice, and is kind of a mentor to Lucas. And Lucas has been trying to get me on the show for a very long time. Me and Jason actually went on the show, and then all of a sudden he found out that it got canceled. I don't know. He doesn't. We have to discuss that now. But he's been doing a lot of stuff. He also was with SEC Unfiltered, and he's done a lot of great stuff. And so, he's also a very opinionated person. He has some very interesting takes. He's since when did you start the college football night kicks? I know you started kind of in the middle of the season.
Yeah, we started all the way back in. My gosh, when was the LSU Ole Miss game? Because I started doing that October. Yeah, sometime in the beginning of October, and literally all it was just we're going to do a weekend show. I'm just going to air on Saturday nights, do a little bit of that. And then I got my co-host Scout, who you can follow him on X at Southern Charm SP, Southern Charm Sports is what a lot of people know him by. He's around the Birmingham area. And we ended up collabing on a video together, and we were like, hey, let's just go ahead and co-host this thing. And since then, we've had a weekly show. We've been averaging about 116 viewers per show, which is mind-boggling to me, knowing that we didn't even start doing weekly shows, Grant, until probably the second or third week of October. And from then on, it's just been taking off. And it's been really fun, dude. It's been a nice little transition to do some things of my own.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, since we're kind of on the topic of college football, let's talk a little about the college football playoff so far. Of course, this year was the first year where we've had an extended college football playoff. The previous 10 years since 2014, there was a 14 playoff. And yet, while there were some exciting games, a lot of those games were duds. And I think the problem was with the 14 playoff was that really it was only the same 4 or 5 teams that are getting in and year out. And I felt like that caused college football with all of the talent that's in college football, it only went to 5 to 6 teams, right? It was like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, and then Oklahoma, and then maybe like LSU or something like that. But those 4 or 5 teams I just mentioned were the main ones kind of hoarding all the talent. But now, since you have an extended college football playoff, along with the other change in college football, regarding NIL and the transfer portal, it seems like now there's a lot more parity, right? Alabama's losing against Vandy. Like they haven't lost against Vandy in 40 years. We see a Notre Dame team, and despite their loss against Northern Illinois, the reason why they've advanced so as far as they have is because of the transfer portal, which was kind of a hot debate about Brian Kelly and LSU and Marcus Freeman. We'll get to that later. Just a lot of SMU being a college football playoff. A lot of that has to do with, of course, them moving the ACC, but also the transfer portal, and then also NIL. SMU was the original NIL team. Back in the 80s, they had to they banned their football. The NCAA had to ban football for a year at SMU, and then SMU the next year banned football altogether just because they didn't have the funds and the team to do so. But just with all the changes in college football, especially with the playoff, has this changed the way? Has this changed the parity in college football in general? I know that was a long way to leading to a question, but I think that's my feelings. Like there's more parity than ever.
I think the parity came within just the season itself, too. I think it was so much more than just what happened during the playoff. The season itself was a complete parity. I mean, who would have thought going into this one that Florida State would finish, 1-10 or 2-9 in the season?
That's great.
And would end up going from first to worst in 1 year of just complete domination, and arguably the best run that Florida State has had, the best 2-year run that Florida State has had probably since 2000, since they had that great run with Jameis and with the great defenses that they had, and even with Dalvin Cook coming in from, I think, probably 13 to 7 to 16 or so.
Yeah.
And you just overall, nobody would have expected things like this. You wouldn't have been expecting Cam Ward to put up Heisman-like numbers and for Miami's defense to just flat out be pitiful when this was a proud Miami defense that had been shutting people out over the last 15, 20 years that had been unbelievable. And then this will tell you some interesting things, Grant. Lance Guidry, the defensive coordinator of the Miami Hurricanes last year, a former Southeastern DC.
Yeah.
So
he's also at McNeese State. He's the head coach of McNeese State. He's been all over the place. He's a straight the Louisiana guy. I think he was the head coach at. I know he's a head coach. So I think it was like Jennings or Suffolk. It was one of those schools. He was also a longtime head coach in Southwest Louisiana as well.
Yeah, I mean, this whole season was just a crazy year. It definitely gave 2007 vibes to me, with all the craziness going on, with how Notre Dame responded after they lost to NIU and seeing the run that they went on. So there's definitely a lot of parity that went along this season. And by the way, Grant, he was a head coach at Karen Crow from 05 to 07.
Yeah, I just saw that, yeah. Yes, I knew he's a Southwestern Louisiana guy. So I knew he was like McNeese State, and then he did his little high school coaching, then he went back to McNeese or something along those lines. But yeah, and the thing that's about the great thing about the extended playoff is that you really get to see who the best teams are, right? Like Ohio State, like we knew all year long that they're the most talented team in college football. We knew that going in. Will Howard is a very experienced quarterback, and I know people have some opinions about him, but he's been a great quarterback for them, especially in these past few weeks or so. You look at the receiving room. Ohio State's receiving room is always great. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in the backfield, and then of course you got the defense with Caleb Downs and all those guys. Like they were the most talented team in college football, but then they lost twice. They lost against Oregon, and they eventually got their revenge in the playoff in the Rose Bowl over Oregon, and then they also lost against Michigan, which I think a lot of people didn't see that coming. But also because of the extended football playoff, they're able to get in. Now, if this was last year, Ohio State would have gotten in. But now this is extended playoff. Now we're really seeing what Ohio State's all about. They destroyed Tennessee, they destroyed Oregon. They defeated a very extremely talented Texas team, right, in the semifinal. Now they're in the national championship. I mean, they're Indiana. We would never seen the college football playoff because they lost one game to Ohio State. A couple other Tennessee. There's a lot. I mean, if we can look at 90% of the teams that were in the playoff this year wouldn't have made the playoff last year, right? And I think a lot of people are like, well, like they're making the case about Notre Dame. Notre Dame wouldn't have been in the playoff last year. Well, they're in the playoff this year with the extension. And then, but not only that, they've won 3 straight games. It's not like they're at a cakewalk. Indiana still, I know people have their opinions about Indiana, but Indiana was 11-1 team, right? They won their games. The only game they lost was against, before the playoff, was a team that's now in the national championship game, right? I mean, and then look at Georgia. Georgia, even if they don't have Carson Beck, I still think Notre Dame's winning that game because Georgia doesn't have the skill players on the outside needed to. And also, Notre Dame was better than them up front, even with the injuries that Notre Dame suffered. And then they beat a pretty good Penn State team. I know people have their opinions about Penn State, but Penn State was in the Big Ten championship and had opportunities to win that game as well against Oregon. So, and Penn State's another example of a team that wouldn't have been in the playoff, right? So I think with the extension of the playoff, has been great for college football. But I think the thing about people are complaining, well, the end of the college football playoff, like, why can't we go back to 4 and blah, 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 blah. Like, why is college football the only sport where, like, you need a mythical national champion to be the national champion? Like, for a long time, college baseball has a tournament. College basketball has a tournament. Every other sport had a tournament, but Division I football. FCS level, Division II, Division III, they had a playoffs. They had a 16-team playoff. College football is the only sport where one game determines the national champion, and we don't have a separate amount of games. And I think just now we're starting to realize how great a playoff has been for major college football.
And I think the problem with that too, Grant, the reason why you're not seeing a big playoff like you see at the Division II, Division III, even the FCS level, is because there's, number one, there's a lack of a conference title.
Yeah.
Unlike what you see in the P4 and even some G5 schools. And they only play 10 games. Meanwhile, in college football, you play 12, you play your conference title, and then your season goes all the way out into January. Meanwhile, in the Division II, Division III, and even FCS level, the season can start probably a week or two before students usually go back to school, because in some states, I know they go back in September. Usually the season will start second or third weekend of August, and the season will go on from there. And that's why kind of the season's condensed right there. But no, you're right, man. Initially, I had a lot of pushback against the 12 team. I thought it should have been 8, to be honest with you. I think
like a lot of people did.
Yeah, I think you could have slimmed it down a good bit just so you could avoid these semi-blowout matchups,
right?
That you were trying to avoid. But I feel like this year, I think once you got past the first round in the quarterfinals, that's when you got to really the bare bones of why there was such a push for only an 18 playoff berth. And look, there's still a lot of things that the CFP is going to have to do in this expanded playoff.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you remember, 98 was the first year of the BCS. It still needed work as the years went on. It never got perfect. It was never a solid opinion and a solid choice for many media and many fans for their team.
Yeah.
And they're going to probably have to do away with the auto buys. I don't see really rewarding. I know you want to reward a conference champion, but it doesn't really make sense to me how you're a conference champion. Oh, Clemson's a great example. Let's say they won the ACC and they were 17th in the nation. Boom, they're all the way up to 3rd in the nation in the final standings. How does that make sense? And how does it really affect us? Are we truly, and sometimes there is a thought of, are we truly getting the 12 best teams in the playoff? And it didn't look like that for the first 2 weeks of the CFP. But I think when we finally got to the Final Four, this is what we have. And we really got 4 fantastic football games to end it off. And I'm sure we'll get into that and more as we progress with the show.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, like, it should the C should have been Georgia. It was Georgia, the Big Ten champion, which is Oregon. Then it should have been Arizona State, and then it should have been Clemson. Period. I get like with Boise State, I get they're like the only they're a 12-1 team. Their only loss was against Oregon of all teams. So I get that aspect, but to me, they should have been the 5th seed. If that's the case, they should have been the 5th seed, because I think it's not their conference is. I'm not saying their conference is weak or anything like that, but to me, like, Clemson at least play people, right? Like Boise State didn't really. I mean, Oregon was the best team they played all year up until the playoff, and when they went up against Penn State, then you started to realize, oh wait, like Boise State. Not saying Boise State isn't a bad team, like they put up a fight against Penn State.
Yeah,
but like besides Ashton Jonty, that's it. I mean, I really thought they should have been in the first round and see how they went up against a team maybe like Indiana, and then and I thought that would have been a better first round game than Indiana and Notre Dame.
Hey man,
Right
don't hate on
between-
my man Maddox Madsen. That dude balled out this season.
Oh no,
even
no,
with,
he played great. But my thing was, I just felt like we would have got better games. I felt like if if you would have, Boise State would have hosted a first round game, and they probably would have gone up against somebody like an Indiana or SMU or somebody like that, where at least you would have gotten a more even type of game. I thought, and really like the blowouts. I mean, the first round, I thought the first round was going to be a bunch of blowouts because that's usually how it is in a lot. Like, for example, the NFL, the wild card is usually a bunch of blowouts. It's never really, there might be a close game, maybe two close games, but usually they're blowouts. That's how it is in the wild card. That's kind of why I view the first round as. When you got the quarterfinals, start seeing it get a little closer. Penn State, Boise State was a competitive game. Arizona State, Texas came down to overtime. Georgia and Notre Dame, that was a competitive game. Although Notre Dame did control most of the game, they're up by 2 touchdowns for most of the game. And then the Oregon Ohio State game, nobody saw that coming, right? Like I think a lot of people thought that was gonna be a close game. Nobody expected Ohio State to blow out Oregon like they did. But just going over the quarterfinals, really start about the quarterfinals, starting with Ohio State. I mean, just Ohio State, of course, we kind of mentioned early in the show that Ohio State, they were the most talented team in college football. They kind of struggled at times a bit trying to find their own identity, but it seems like they're finding their identity now, Lucas, especially starting off with their first round playoff game against Tennessee. That was extremely impressive. And then we're like, maybe, Ohio State looked pretty good at consistency. Can they do it against Oregon? And then they blew out Oregon. And now everyone's like, this might be the best team in the country. Lucas, do you see that as is? I mean, or do you think that Notre Dame, the other team, other side of the bracket, Notre Dame may be the best team in the country?
I think right now, there's no question in my mind, Ohio State is the best team in college football. You look back after that Michigan game, they were pissed. The way that they reacted after the flag got planted in their home stadium, which they allowed it to happen. You got pushed around on the line of scrimmage. You got absolutely dominated from start to finish on the line of scrimmage. And you allowed your rival, which you should have blown out by 2 or more touchdowns, and you allowed them to come into your house, and you allowed them to run you out of Columbus, essentially. And now all of a sudden, Ryan Day's got his tail tucked between his feet or his legs, and realizing, oh crap, I got to get my dudes in order. I got to get this offense rolling. And then that first game against Tennessee, I guarantee you, nobody in the media thought that Ohio State's front was going to be able to compete with an SEC front five after what they saw against Michigan. And then they come out, they sack Nico Iamaleava, 4 times?
Yeah.
They put pressure on him tremendously. Will Howard's been letting this frickin' football rip ever since the start of the postseason. It's like Chip Kelly just realized, oh my gosh, I've got 2 first-round receivers out, and I got dudes that can go down the field and make plays for myself and my offense. And so it's incredible to me that it took this long for this Ohio State offense to get rolling and to see the amount of speed that they have and to see how much talent they have out at their skill positions. You talked about already Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, who to me are the best backfield tandem in college football, can be. They were going into the season. They didn't play like it at times, but in the postseason, they took advantage of the opportunities they had in front of them. They took advantage of shutting down that Tennessee front four that did nothing against that Ohio State offensive line. You go the very next week to Oregon, going up against the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line. You sack Dylan Gabriel 8 times. Then you go the very next week. You continue to put pressure on another first-round talent of an offensive line, and your defensive line wins you the football game at the end of the day. The way that your both sides of the line of scrimmage have played since the postseason began. Somebody lit a fire under Ryan Day, and he said, hey, you better get your guys in order, or next year it's going to be hell for you. There's no way that you can allow to go into the postseason, get bounced in the first round, and expect the expectations to be, oh, everything's all fine and dandy in Columbus. Now, when you look at them realistically, this is truly the best team in college football on all sides of the football right now.
Yeah, I mean, well said. I mean, just Ohio State, it just seemed like Ohio State just, for some reason, was trying to be kind of like a ground and pound type of team, but in reality, like, they are a finesse team. That's how they've usually been under Ryan Day with Justin Fields and CJ Stroud. And they've always had really great receivers. And, like, they have two fantastic running backs. So I understand why they're trying to become like kind of a ground and pound team. But at the same time, like, you just have speed. You're faster than everybody. Use it. And I felt like against Michigan, the thing about Michigan is that Michigan is seen kind of as the physical bully, while Ohio State just, in recent years has been seen as soft. And I think he was trying to prove a point against Michigan, and they completely backfired and knocked them out of the Big Ten championship, and really made them get to a lower seed. They were probably a top 4 seed going into, the last week of college football, and then they get bounced by Michigan. They got the 8th seed, and that was gonna be a tough road because they had to play Oregon again or somebody of that effect. But yeah, just Ohio State just finally found their identity, and they're using their speed, and that's what's got them there. But going to the bottom side of the bracket, Notre Dame, they're a very interesting team. I know we all know they lost against Northern Illinois, but after that loss, it seemed like they figured some things out. Of course, it's been known that Marcus Freeman talked with Northern Illinois coach Thomas Hammond after the game. To kind of see, like, because I think Marcus Freeman wanted to know what his weaknesses were in the team. The Northern Illinois exposed, and it seems like he figured out what those weaknesses are, and they went on winning streak. Did not lose a single game for the rest of the year. They go in the college football playoff, and you look at the road. And I remember I was talking to my little brother, and me and Noah, like, we're looking at each other like, yeah, Notre Dame has a chance to make a run. Because Indiana, they had a good season, but Indiana's Indiana. You're going against a Georgia team, and I know that their quarterback was out. I still think even with Carson Beck, Notre Dame was going to beat Georgia because they don't have the skill talent on the outside like they did last year. And then also their run game isn't as strong. Georgia's been suspect all year, and I think that played into Notre Dame's hands. And you saw that, especially because they beat them 23-10. I think even Carson Beck, I think Notre Dame still would have, maybe it wouldn't have been as soundly, but they still would have beat Georgia. And then go to Penn State, and I think, it took a lot to beat Penn State. And I know Riley Leonard was struggling, but then they put in Stephen Angeli, and Stephen Angeli led them down the field. They got a field goal out of it, but I think it kind of ignited the offense. And then second half, Riley Leonard went off, throwing the ball down the field. And he was throwing some dots down the field. And then, of course, their defense was strong near the end, got the interception, set the game-winning field goal. They're in a national championship game. Just what do you have to say about Notre Dame? Just kind of resilience over the course of the year. What you've seen from them since they started the winning streak, especially going into the college football playoff. And then also, do you think that the way they play football is kind of the antidote to Ohio State speed?
I think when you really look at where Notre Dame was after that Northern Illinois loss, this was a lost team. Everybody was expecting after that loss, all right, well, this is just going to be another 9-3, 10-2 season, and then we'll end up in either the Sun Bowl or the Gator Bowl again. But I think afterwards, they had Riley Leonard held a players-only meeting with the main captains that said, this is unacceptable with what we're doing. We're getting beat on the offensive line. We're losing the time of possession. Our defense is not playing as aggressive as they can be. And look at what they've done since then. They've had a couple close calls, but they have been so stout on that defensive side of the ball. And it starts with their linebacking core specifically, Jace. When you look at those dudes and you see how they fly around the football, I mean, you're looking at guys like Jack Kaiser, who played a spy role in that win against Georgia, That dude was all over the field when it was all said and done. Drake Bowen, who's had a magnificent postseason. The guy has been all over the field as well. Joshua Burnham. Who else am I missing? I mean, there's a plethora of linebackers that really came up big. Jaden Osbury, a U High alum, has shown up in the postseasons, made some huge plays. Got a huge fumble recovery in the red zone. Made some big breaks on the football the other day, against Penn State. I mean, just what they've been able to do to shut down these offenses and to shut down arguably the strength of a lot of teams has really been a contributing factor to that linebacking core that has really shown up in big time situations. And so something else that you're seeing is the passing game kind of open up a bit more. Everybody knows about the two-headed monster with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price this year, both combining for just over 1,800 yards. Both have been really good with running the football. Jeremiah Love's more of your shifty back, but ever since he's kind of been hurt ever since the Indiana game, and really since then, they've really opened up the passing game a good bit. I know Leonard only had 90 yards against Georgia, but even then, the throws that he makes, short, intermediate throws that help this team go down the field, and his ability to scramble and get out in space has been really impressive. And more of what you saw against Penn State, Jaden Greathouse had a heck of a game. I mean, I've been waiting on a guy like that for Mitchell Evans to continue what he's been doing. Aeneas Williams has been very active in the postseason. I mean, you got to get your playmakers the football, and it's been guys like Evans, it's been guys like Greathouse, and it's been just a consistent plethora of guys that you've been able to, because on Notre Dame, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that's not really known for having a quarterback that can throw the football down the field. And with what you have right now with Riley Leonard, you're taking what you can get and you are satisfied with what you have. And it's impressive to me how this offense has come together and finally been able to put together drives and not stall after what their defense puts out. And they improved that drastically after last week, after their showing against Georgia, where their offense really didn't show up a good bit. But I think afterwards in that Penn State game, you really saw the offense really open up a lot more for Riley Leonard to work. And you've gotten your playmakers that not a whole lot of people have heard about in the regular season, the football, and they're making a difference in the biggest moments.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. So Notre Dame's in terms of their defensive stats, they are second in pass defense. The only team that's ahead of them is Ohio State. And then they're also fifth in passes intercepted, with Xavier Watts leading the team with 6 interceptions. So they're fantastic. These are arguably the two best defenses in college football going at it. So I think if you're Notre Dame, of course, you want to control the clock. You want to keep Ohio State's offense off the field for the most part, run the ball effectively. Can Riley Leonard have another big-time game throwing the ball? We don't know.
And that's what helped Notre Dame win a lot of games this year, is their ability to control the time of possession and to be able to go on these 5, 6, 7-minute drives just to trickle down the clock, not allow for offenses to get on the field, keep the defense on their heels and keep them on the field. And it's just continued to help them win games. And I think if Notre Dame can generate turnovers come next Monday, we might be in for a close one, Grant, but we'll just have to see. I'm sure we'll get into predictions pretty soon.
Yeah, but real quick, let's go to talk about predictions now a little bit before we get on the next topic, which is LSU, because Notre Dame's going to segue into an LSU question, but let's go over the predictions real quick. I've kind of noticed this too, that the line for Notre Dame and Ohio State just keeps dropping and dropping. It just seems like I feel like it's going to be a really close game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and maybe you do too, but who do you see winning this football game?
I think it's got to go to the best team in college football right now, and that's Ohio State. I just see too much explosiveness. And even when you couldn't get guys like Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka involved in the offense, look, Jeremiah Smith finished with 1 catch last week against Texas. Emeka Egbuka had 3 catches on the opening drive. He had 2 the rest of the game. And so even in those situations, you're getting guys like Carnell Tate the football. You're getting your tight ends involved. You're getting the running game involved. And when you have a plethora of those combined, and you see how this defensive line has been performing ever since the postseason, it may be a long night for Notre Dame. I just don't see a scenario where I can see Riley Leonard and this offense be able to compete with what Ohio State has done this year. I don't think it's going to be a big blowout, but I do see this one getting into the double digits, and I do see Ohio State covering.
Yeah, definitely. I have Ohio State win this too. However, looking at that Texas game and looking how the receivers kind of struggled a lot throughout the course of the game, I also felt like Texas kind of gave Notre Dame the game plan for that game. I mean, Notre Dame has a great. I think we talk a lot about the players, and of course with Riley Leonard and their 2 running backs, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian. What's his last name again?
Egbuka?
No, for Notre Dame. The other running back.
Love.
And then the other guy, yeah. There's another
running
back.
Jadarian Price.
Jadarian Price, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you got those guys. Of course, you got the defense, of course, with Xavier Watts and Jack Kaiser. But I think the coaching staff, deserves a lot of love, too, with Marcus Freeman. Has done a fantastic job. I really think he's done a great job with this. I know a lot of people will say, well, he took over for Brian Kelly when he had a lot of talent. But, I mean, yeah, he saw a lot of talent, but he's never really had a quarterback throughout his time at Notre Dame. I mean, I know last year at Sam Hartman, but even Sam Hartman was pretty disappointing for the most part. But he's won a lot of games without a quarterback. He's won a lot of big games. I mean, he's 13-4 against top 25 teams, and he's 5-3 against teams in the top 10, which actually that 5 wins are actually more than Brian Kelly had throughout his time at Notre Dame. And also right now he is 3-0 in major postseason games. Brian Kelly's not won a single one, which leads to my next question, kind of going into LSU football. I know there's been a lot of talk about LSU football since we're in Louisiana. I know you're in Baton Rouge, and I'm LSU alum, and I also cover LSU. There was a lot of debate on Twitter on whether or not, I think a lot of people were comparing Marcus Freeman's time to Brian Kelly's time. Although I do think that Brian Kelly took over Notre Dame. Brian Kelly took over Notre Dame at a really bad time in Notre Dame, right? Like Notre Dame throughout the 2000s was a mediocre program at best. He took over, and by his 3rd year, they go to the national championship game, and really he brought Notre Dame back to national relevance. I know a lot of people say he didn't get the job done. Some of the teams he played in those big-time bowl games were just buzzsaws, right? And he also didn't have the transfer portal and NIL and stuff. Well, Notre Dame doesn't really benefit from NIL, but the transfer portal and stuff along those lines, right? But the thing is, Brian Kelly's never been able to win those big games, and he's still occurring at LSU. Meanwhile, his successor, Marcus Freeman, who was his defense coordinator in Brian Kelly's last year at Notre Dame, has had a lot of success at Notre Dame. And I know you can say it's because of the transfer portal and, of course, the extended college football playoff. But he still has to win those games, he still has to win those games. And he's also – Notre Dame's had a lot of injuries too. People don't realize how much injuries Notre Dame's had. And even when I went to turn in the last game, I didn't know I think it was their starting left tackle was out. So they had to put their backup in. And then another lineman got hurt during that game as well. So they're playing, they're dealing with a lot of injuries. So is Ohio State, but Notre Dame is going, doing this without some of their better players. With that being said, I know this is kind of an unfair question, but how much more pressure is on Brian Kelly to win next year? And there was already a lot of pressure already because of the disappointing year they had this past year, but how much more pressure will be on Notre Dame, on Brian Kelly if Notre Dame wins his national championship game next Monday?
I don't think there really is a whole lot of pressure on Brian Kelly. I understand what the fans are wanting, especially in LSU, and seeing what they have had to deal with over the last several years. And look, there has been way too many excuses kind of thrown at BK's way as well. Everybody goes back and looks at what happened in his first year. Okay, you win 10 games, you win the SEC West, you go to Atlanta. The very next year, okay, you get a Heisman winning quarterback, but your defense absolutely sucks, but you still win 10 games. This year was odd. I'll say that. You dealt with injuries on the offensive line. It was an underwhelming season, to say the least. Your offensive line underperformed at points during the season, and you end up only winning 9 games, and you end up losing to a Florida team which didn't even have a prayer of making a bowl game this year. Plus, you got embarrassed by Alabama, your rival, at home. You got embarrassed by Texas A&M in the last quarter and a half. And overall, your ability to finish games and to win the big one on the road has been BK's Achilles heel, dating all the way back to what he did at Notre Dame. I mean, yes, everybody loves what BK did. Won 112 games, and in his last 5 years since 2017, the guy went 5 straight years with 10-win seasons, and in 3 of those 5 seasons, they finished in the top 10. And look, we can harp on BK for that, but look, expectations are just straight up different in Baton Rouge. It was only 5 years ago that LSU won a national title. In fact, dang near 5 years ago today is when it happened. And so I think that there is a good bit of pressure. I think it's overblown, though, because I think going into next year, I think you got to be real at the same time, because you're losing a lot of offensive line talent. You're losing a lot of guys that you're going to end up missing. You're going to lose 2 first-round tackles in Will Campbell and Emory Jones. Well, I'd say that. Maybe Will Campbell. Emory Jones, I'd say he would have been a first-round pick, but I think this year was a rough one for him. But regardless of that, I think that when you look overall at his tenure, you look at the missed expectations, it's easy to understand why there's so much pressure on him. But I think LSU fans are just being too much with that, because if there was so much pressure, why did it take so long to fire Les Miles then? Right. Les Miles would have been fired within 3 years after he ended up losing the national title. He should have been fired after 2015, but they gave him a grace year. And look, I understand why there's so much pressure, knowing what happened with Ed Orgeron and what the outcome of that tenure was. I don't see this being anything like that, but if I'm an LSU fan, I'm remaining calm, and I have a lot to look forward next year. Look at what I'm returning on defense. Look at what I have coming back on the offensive side of the ball. I got my starting quarterback. I've got a lot to look forward to in the portal. The biggest question is, can you transfer all of their previous success, and can you mold it all together and put the same thing on the field in what could be a top 10 LSU team in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really LSU fans. A lot of LSU fans were actually defending Brian Kelly throughout his time at Notre Dame. So I want to say that, get that aspect out there. But I think, and really, it's like Notre Dame fans were doing what you were doing, basically what you're trying to say is, it was like, well, BK, Notre Dame's better without BK and blah, blah, blah. And then LSU fans a lot of them were, I would say, defending BK throughout his time in Notre Dame. Although and then I mentioned this on Twitter. I'll pull it up in a second. But I got some flack for it. But I think the main thing was, well, Marcus Freeman lost against Northern Illinois, like blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, he lost against Northern Illinois, but you know who Marcus Freeman also beat? A&M and USC. He beat A&M on the road, the same place that LSU lost at by double digits, and beat USC.
Yeah.
LSU lost against a bad USC team.
I think this year it was odd because LSU made a lot of quarterbacks look really freaking good. You mentioned already USC. Miller Moss popped off in that game, and everybody's like, oh, he's going to be a first-round draft pick, and then all of a sudden he's benched for Jaden Maiava. You look at what he did with Jalen Milroe, and it makes him look like a first-round talent. It makes him look like a beast from out of nowhere. And then you look at the rest of the season, he's probably the most underwhelming quarterback and one that gives Alabama fans a lot of freaking nightmares with his inconsistent play. You've made Marcel Reed look good whenever he looked inconsistent. And DJ Lagway, I think that game against Florida is the start of the DJ Lagway saga of what's to come for Florida. I don't know what's going to happen the next several years with him and Billy Napier there, but I think keeping Napier in Gainesville was a huge win for them and a huge win in the recruiting cycle as well.
So, going off of what you said, the thing is about Brian Kelly, the whole discourse really was LSU fans defending Brian Kelly because kind of the points I mentioned before, Brian Kelly didn't really benefit from the extended playoff. Brian Kelly didn't, took over a really bad situation at Notre Dame at the time because when he took over in 2010, the previous decade, really you could say the decade and a half, Notre Dame was a above average. Actually, they're a mediocre program. Period. I mean, when I was growing up, when I was a little kid, Notre Dame was. I mean, they had the occasion. During the Brady Quinn years, they went to the Fiesta Bowl and they went to the Sugar Bowl, but they lost both of them. Before Marcus Freeman got there, Notre Dame had not won a major bowl game since 1994 or 1995. So it's been almost so between the gaps between Marcus Freeman and the last bowl, it was 30 years.
Yeah,
it's been 30 years since the last time Notre Dame won a major bowl game, and even under Brian Kelly, they didn't win a major bowl game. And then only with the transfer portal, the academic restrictions, and recruiting, when they went up against when they went to a major bowl game, they often got boat raced because they went up against 2012 Alabama, which was a team full of dudes who played in the NFL for a very long time. Then they lost against Ohio State in the 2015 Fiesta Bowl, and that team was loaded. And really, that team would have benefited if you had the extended playoff. Then that team probably would have benefited the most because their only loss was because a very good Michigan State team that won the Big Ten and went to the college football playoff that year. And then in 2018, Clemson, and then 2020 Alabama. So they ran to a buzzsaw. So and obviously those teams were better than Notre Dame, but at the same time, Brian Kelly and his carried over to LSU has not won the big game. Even if that's maybe true, his losing ways in big games carried over to LSU, and that's a fact. And Brian Kelly has been 4-8 against top 25 teams since he's been at LSU. And some of those games he showed like A&M. The LSU was a better team than A&M. They self-destructed in the second half. I mean, the game against USC. And now I know USC didn't end up the season ranked, but at the time, USC was seen as a good team. And then as the season went on, the loss was worse and worse and worse. As you mentioned, the quarterback got benched. It just seems like whenever Brian Kelly gets these big games, kind of similar to James Franklin, the lights get too bright for him. And my thoughts were about Marcus Freeman is that Notre Dame may be better under Marcus Freeman because Marcus Freeman's a younger coach. He connects with the kids better. Not only that, he knows how to handle big game situations. He's only 38, 39 years old. And every time I see, the thing about Notre Dame, they may not be better than the team they're playing against or going up against, but I know they're going to play hard, right? And I can't really say that the same thing about Brian Kelly. Whenever Brian Kelly gets in these big-time games, they lose by double digits. It's true. I mean, and I know he's still got a lot of time left. I mean, the team he's bringing in is going to be talented, right? They have the number one transfer portal class in the country. They have a bunch of young guys coming in. The cavalry's coming. And I think LSU has a chance to be really good next year. But if they lose against Clemson that first game of the year, the same fans that were defending him because he failed to do the thing at Notre Dame are going to be the same ones that are going to be asking LSU to fire him. And that happened throughout the course of the year. I mean, the same fans that were saying They were trying to protect Brian Kelly. We're also saying we're trying to fire him during the middle of the year. So I get that it's kind of unfair to compare Brian Kelly and Marcus Freeman, and I'm not even trying to compare the two. But people will. That's going to be a thing. I mean, people are doing it now.
Yeah, the everything that you basically said just basically sums it up. It's not going to stop anytime soon. And it's because of the high expectations that people have at LSU. And it's because of all that is going on over the last 15 years of LSU. And they don't want another fallout like they've had before. They don't want another fallout like they had with Les Miles. They don't want to have another fallout like they had with Ed Orgeron. And look, it wasn't a really popular choice when BK was hired at LSU, but it was what you wanted if you were an LSU fan. You want a guy that's a player's coach. To me, BK doesn't give off that. And I see in a couple years that if everything doesn't go the way it is intended for him to go, by the end of his contract, he's probably going to end up jumping ship to another team. He's probably going to go back up north. I have a very strong possibility that could potentially happen. Now, if it doesn't, if he manages to stay the rest of his career in Baton Rouge, congratulations, you did it. But if you're dominating the portal like you are this year and you come out flat with another 9-4 season, there's going to be a lot of talk around Baton Rouge. The expectations are just going to keep getting lower and lower and lower throughout the rest of his tenure until something changes.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I said. This is after Notre Dame beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And I said Notre Dame has won not one, but two. They've won now three. But at the time, they'd won two college football / New Year's Six bowl games under Marcus Freeman. They have not won a major postseason game since the mid-'90s and lost 4 of them under Brian Kelly. I know LSU fans don't want to hear this, but Notre Dame might be better with Freeman than BK, and that set off a storm, right? Mm-hmm. That comes with the territory. But then as time goes, but here's the thing: as time goes on, like that may be a cold take, and I'm okay with that being a cold take. Cold takes are going to happen, right? We both work in the sports journalism field where you're going to have some takes that are going to stick like glue, and then you're going to have some takes you're like, damn, I can't believe I said those words out of my mouth. But right now, Notre Dame might be a better team with Marcus Freeman than we were with Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly is a damn good ball coach, but the way Notre Dame has played in big games under Freeman and the way big games have been played under Kelly at Notre Dame and even at LSU, like I'm going to take Marcus Freeman every time in a big game. Brian Kelly may be a better coach than Marcus Freeman, but I know Marcus Freeman is going to get his guys ready to play. Brian Kelly really has not shown that. And the Alabama game is the perfect example of that, right? And it's not even just Alabama in this previous season, or this season 2024, but in 2022 when they went against Tennessee, it was the same thing. Now they did beat Ole Miss and they did beat Alabama, but other than that, I mean, they really haven't had any major victories. The only other major victory they had, Missouri last year, but I don't see Missouri the same I see in Alabama or any of these top teams. I mean, it is Ole Miss, but even Ole Miss was a suspect to lose, especially in a place like Death Valley. I think if you're LSU and you're LSU fans, yes, Brian Kelly's a hell of a coach, but at a certain point, when is enough enough? And if they lose against Clemson, is the program really moving the right direction? Because I think Brian Kelly is great at stabilizing. That's what Brian Kelly's been here to do, was to stabilize the program and then get the program to the top of the top, and win national championships. Right now, Brian Kelly is just stabilizing it, right? That's what he's doing. I'm not saying he's doing a bad job, but your goal at LSU is not to stabilize. Your goal to LSU is to terrorize, like they were under Nick Saban, like they were under Les Miles early on, right? I mean, that's kind of the problem with LSU right now. If they don't do that beginning of the year next year against Clemson, it's going to be a long road ahead of them, because Because people are, well, they can win out. Yeah, they can win out, but nothing's guaranteed in the SEC. We just saw that this previous season. The SEC cannibalized itself. Alabama lost against Vandy and a really bad Oklahoma team. Ole Miss lost against 4-8 Kentucky. Like, nothing is guaranteed, especially in the conferences like the SEC. But before we move on to a little bit of the NFL, what else do you have to say about what we just talked about?
Honestly, dude, I mean, we hold Texas A&M to a high standard. We know that they're going to finish 8-4 at the end of next year.
Right.
I promise you that. And Texas A&M friends don't want to hear it, but it is the flat out truth. Why do we hold Texas A&M to a high freaking standard? They get off to these great starts. They've been doing this since the Kevin Sumlin era. Ever since Johnny Manziel left.
They've been doing this forever. Like, just like, keep this in mind. A&M, with the amount of resources that they have, they've been doing this forever. It's not even just like a Kevin Sumlin thing. This is going back to like Bear Bryant, right? Like, Barry Bryant, here's the thing. I'm going to put this in perspective. Barry Bryant's last year there, they were like supposed to be one of the best teams in the country. And although they had the Heisman Trophy winner with the guy by the name of John David Crow, who was from Louisiana, actually, for people who don't know that, they went like 5-4. Like, they were extremely disappointing. Like, just don't get me wrong. Like, A&M's always been like this. This is who A&M is. That's been the joke about A&M. Like, here's the thing. A&M offered Eric Dickerson a buttload of money. They offered him cars, oil fields, you name it, and he still went to SMU. But that's what I'm saying. Texas A&M has more resources than 90% of the college football teams. Yet they choke every year because you know why? Because they're A&M.
Grant, you know that's still going on today in college football. I hope you know that.
Oh yeah.
There's been a bag man in college football for the last 80 plus years.
Oh, I know that. I know that. That's what I said. Like, there's always been a bag man. Now it's just out in the open. I keep telling people that. Like, well, why can't we go back to college football back in the old days?
With NIL, it's still out there.
Yeah, no, yeah. Like, there's a bag. There's big guys giving you cars, oil fields. Like, it's still going on. Now it's just out in the open. People are like, oh, NIL's ruining the sport. Like, what do you think has been happening in the last 60 to 70 years, dog? Like, this has been a thing forever. How do you think Nick Saban was able to land guys out of Southeast Louisiana to go to Alabama? The same guys he used at Alabama to get land those kids, the same kids he used, the same bagman he used at Alabama to land those kids were the same guys he was using when he was at LSU. That's how he made those connections. Texas was paying players forever. I think about any big time program, I guarantee you they were paying players. I mean, it's just a guarantee. I don't know. People are complaining about that. But let's not move out of the college football for now. Let's go to the NFL. And first, let's talk about the Saints, and then we'll talk about the playoffs. But Mickey Loomis met with the media the other day, and it's just your stereotypical Mickey Loomis.
Is he smacking on my freaking gum again?
I didn't see the whole thing. I saw parts of it, but what I do know probably was I wasn't paying attention. I was just listening. I was also like just writing down notes as I went. But Mickey Loomis, it sounded like they might be moving off of Derek Carr. I don't know, but what it tells you, it just seems like nothing's going to remain the same. However, there was a Boehner quote he'd had, and when I mean Boehner, it was probably one of the best quotes of all time, which is just because the results aren't what we want, that doesn't mean we're doing something wrong, which is awesome. But anyway, with that being said, is Mickey Loomis the thing that is holding the Saints back the most? I know people are going to say Derek Carr. I know people are going to say, the lack of receiver production. I know the aging stars, but all of that is because of Mickey Loomis.
Yeah. I'll say this, Grant. When I first saw that quote on Instagram, I wanted to frickin' fall out of my chair. I wanted to frickin' throw my phone against the frickin' wall. I was so mad. There is no way that you can legitimately come to the fan base and talk to them directly when you're talking to the media and legitimately say that, it's not a big deal that we go 5-12 or we're not going anywhere, and all this other or BS that he puts out. There's no, dude. You're freaking delusional. Number one, you have put together terrible rosters, terrible drafts that have gone either injured or they're not developed properly. You've gone through a head coach that you wanted to hire internally that you knew had a rap sheet before, especially with the Raiders, and it was a horrible decision. Dennis Allen should have never been the head coach of the Saints to start off with. Second of all, you go out and you pay $100 million for, look, I love and respect Derek Carr. I absolutely do, dude. I mean, this is probably one of my favorite quarterbacks that I've gotten to interact with ever since I've been going to these Saints games the last 2 years. I love talking to Derek. But the thing about this is that he's so inconsistent with the football in his hands. It's like as soon as he got the bag, he said, all right, forget it. You know, I've heard rumors about him being a bit toxic in the locker room, not just in what happened with Vegas and with Oakland, and even in New Orleans. He's kind of carried that over. And finally, I'll get to this. Grant, it's time to gut house on the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era, dude.
Yes. Yeah.
It's absolutely time to move on. They're trying to hold on to the memories of that. Look, honor guys like DeMario Davis. Honor guys like Tyrann Mathieu. Honor guys like Cam Jordan and all these other guys that were around. Honor guys like Ryan Ramczyk, who, let's just be honest, his career is almost over because it's hard for an offensive lineman to recover from an injury like he's had. He's been injury prone the last 2 seasons. There's no way he's coming back anytime soon. And and even Alvin, he's getting close to that age where he's about to retire pretty soon. Now, granted, he's got a year or 2 left, but I think at this point, when you got rid of Marshawn Lattimore, there's more that's about to come down. Mickey's going to be gone pretty soon. You're going to see a gutted house in New Orleans, and you're going to see a brand new roster within the next, maybe, if not next year, 2 years from now.
And I'll say this too, because you mentioned that. I forget where you mentioned that along the lines, but like, so Derek Carr's that's who he is. He's kind of what Matt Moscona says, an empty yards emperor. Basically, like a lot of his yards comes down to like crunch time or where the game really doesn't matter. Like Derek Carr is a good quarterback, right? He's made 3 Pro Bowls for a reason. But at this point in time, it was not worth giving him $120 million, $130 million. Like they get, I think it was $150 million. Actually.
And that's why he wants to take a pay. That's why they're wanting him to take a pay cut.
Right, but that's the thing though. Is like making like if you're really trying to. I know that my thing is though they should have rebuilt the second Sean Payton walked out the door. That's where you start looking at your roster and like, okay, this guy's getting older. Let's give him his flowers, but we got to let him go. But he kept extending them and giving them a few more dollars.
Yeah.
Did the same with Taysom Hill. He did that with Cam Jordan. He did that with Demario Davis. I love Demario Davis. I love Cam Jordan. Those guys have been awesome representatives of the Saints, and also Taysom Hill as well. But Taysom Hill is a gadget player. Cam Jordan and Demario Davis are old. They're getting up there, right? Tyrann Mathieu is older, right? You got him. The reason why he came at the Saints is to retire in his hometown and his career in his hometown. Like, and if you wanted to get a guy like Derek Carr, then why don't you just keep Andy Dalton?
Yeah.
Like, might as well just kept him. Might as well just kept him and focus on building up your roster, trying to get some of the key pieces that may be getting older. And it's time to move on, get some new first blood in. But the problem is when the Saints do that, they mess it up. Look at who they drafted: Peyton Turner, Trevor Penning, Chris Olave may be the best pick they've had, but he's injury prone. He's been injury prone throughout his 2-3 seasons in New Orleans. And then like it's just like, and then you go out and pay Derek Carr. You go out and pay Derek Carr. You hire Dennis Allen, but you don't. But it's clear that the players don't like him, especially after that Falcons stuff. You kind of saw those discontent. Like, and I know people want to blame Pete Carmichael, and yes, Pete Carmichael was not a good OC, but who hired him? It was, I mean, Dennis Allen literally had to beg him to be the offensive coordinator. Pete Carmichael didn't want the job. That should be an idea that maybe he doesn't want to be offensive coordinator. But all the problems with the Saints all go back to Mickey. And the problem is, I really do think this. He's never going to get fired because I think Gale might be a little bit too loyal to Mickey. But then also, like, it's kind of one of those things. Does Gale have inner to get rid of Mickey Loomis? Because, look, who knows how many more years Gale is going to have left in terms of, not let alone, like, living. Well, not let alone day-to-day, game-to-game operations, but living. It's like she's getting up there, too. She's old. And she doesn't have any kids. She doesn't have anybody that she could just hand the Saints to. She's going to have to sell it. So is she going to sell it like in the next few years and then Mickey's going to be gone by then? I don't know, but it's very clear, and the Saints fans it's going to be a thing throughout the season. The local media, national media, fans, they're all going to be saying the same thing. You have to get rid of Mickey Loomis. They're going to be, if the Saints will not be very good next year, and on the bags, when they had those ink bags on, it's going to say, fire Mickey Loomis. And make it all goes back to Mickey. And just point blank, period. But enough Saints talk. It's getting a little bit depressing in terms of the Saints. But let's talk about the playoffs. Teams that are actually good, right? We had some really good playoff games the other day. Of course, the Ravens. The Ravens looked great. The Bills looked great. The Ravens beat the Steelers 28-14. Then in the other games, the Bills beat the brakes off the Broncos. The Broncos scored early with that long touchdown. I was like, here comes the Broncos. They could pull off the upset, and then the Bills and Josh Allen just settled down, and then they got things taken care of. The Lions, of course, got the bye. The Chiefs got the bye. Eagles took care of business against the Packers. The Packers are depleted. So easy peasy for the Eagles. The Rams were able to pick up a huge win in honor of everything that's happened in LA. All my prayers go out to the Los Angeles community. I live down in the Bay Area, but the LA was also a town that I got very familiar with because a lot of my friends live out in LA, and I love LA. LA is a great. I mean, it depends on what area in LA you go to, but it's a great city all around. A lot of great culture there, of course. The Commanders were able to pick up a huge win over the Buccaneers. JD5 does it again. He's been one of the best clutch quarterbacks this year, which is crazy to think about because he's a rookie. And then the Texans were able to pick up a huge win over the Chargers. I mean, of all the playoff games, what was your biggest takeaway?
I think if I am the Bills, I'm concerned. If I'm a Bills fan, I'm really concerned again. Because you looked early on in that football game, you should have been dominating, and you just were not able to put points on the board. You let Bo Nix and this Broncos team be able to drive down the field. You had stupid penalties that allowed them to matriculate the football down the field, get themselves into field goal range, but they aren't able to come away with a whole lot of anything. And then you finally turn it on in the second half. You can't do that against the Ravens. You can't do that against Lamar Jackson and this explosive offense and what they've been able to do this season. When you look at the Texans, to me, this is probably the worst the Texans have looked since C.J. Stroud took over last year. I know this was kind of a step back a little bit in the DeMeco Ryans era. I will say they looked a hell of a lot better when it came to that playoff game against the Chargers. And I saw a meme not too long ago. Ever since the dirty bubble picked up Jim Harbaugh, the Texans outscored the Chargers 32-6 after this one. So maybe the dirty bubble will show up again against the Chiefs. I knew the Rams were going to take care of business against the Vikings. I just could not see a Vikings team that really didn't have a good win this year, except for the Packers, go any further. Sam Darnold made a lot of personal mistakes throughout that game. Just inexcusable throws that he made, held the football for way too long. That offensive line got bullied by that LA front four. And if I'm the Eagles, I am doing anything I can in blitz protection, adding an extra guy back there, keeping Kenneth Gainwell or whomever it is in the backfield, and making sure that I'm not getting beat on these blitzes that LA loves to do, and to stay away from the turnovers, not let them beat you in your own little mental errors, so that you are continuing to be able to continue your potential run for a Super Bowl. But I think this year is it's down to two. It's down to probably three teams, maybe even four. Three are from the AFC. One is from the NFC. I think the Lions have this one all the way. The Chiefs, Ravens, and Bills, it's a race to the top. And it's so unfortunate that we only get to see two different. It's kind of unfortunate that there's not a lot more of a playoff system, that we get to see more from these three, because these are probably the three best teams in the NFL right now, the Chiefs, Bills, and Ravens at this point. But we're in for an exciting divisional round.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this divisional round. I mean, starting off, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, which will be the Bills and the Ravens. I think this is something that we've been waiting for all year, to see Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Those are the two guys that will be up for the MVP. Personally, I think Lamar Jackson will win it, just given what he's done. I mean, statistically, numbers-wise, he's better than Josh Allen, but also just the things he's done this year. I mean, just all the crazy plays. Every time I watch Lamar Jackson, he's making a game-changing play with his feet, and he's also just looks great as a passer. I think this is the best pass season I've ever seen Lamar play, which, Lamar is often called a running back, jokingly, a lot, sometimes maybe even serious, but this year was really the first year where we really got to see a very efficient Lamar Jackson in the passing game. Can he do this again in the playoffs? Because he really has struggled so far in the playoffs. It'll be very interesting. Josh Allen's the other guy. Josh Allen's also had an awesome year so far. He's looked like this probably is also his best year as a quarterback. Just who you got in this game? Because, I mean, it could go either way. It could really go either way. And I think really this game, I think the winner of this game, in my opinion, I think goes to the Super Bowl. I think the Chiefs are very good. But the problem with the Chiefs is that, they win a lot of close games, and yes, they're a championship-winning team, but eventually you're going to have that game where it's going to come back to bite you. Do you think who do you see winning this game against the Bills and the Ravens?
I think it's going to come down to who has the football last, and I think that knowing that it's going to be in Buffalo, you know how Lamar Jackson has fared in the postseason. I think he's 3-6 in the postseason right now, and has just been unable to get past that hurdle that is Kansas City and Buffalo and advance any further. I think that this is the Bills' year. I think that everything coming together has finally proven themselves, has finally come to fruition, I should say, for Buffalo. I think this is the year that is probably their best chance to get to the Super Bowl, because time's running on Josh Allen's career. You're gonna lose. Your defense is aging pretty quickly. I mean, you look at guys that are already on that roster. Matt Milano. You talk about Ed Oliver. The speed that they have from that secondary has been electric this year. And I think that this truly is probably one of the last opportunities that Buffalo will have before that window ends up closing. The problem is they still got to get through Kansas City, who's the king of the AFC right now. And like Ric Flair says, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And that's what Buffalo's going to have to do.
Yeah, and I also want to make this clear too with Lamar Jackson, just the playoffs. He's 3-4, but you also have to account for in 2020. In 2020, the game that they lost, he was injured. I think at the beginning of the third quarter, because he got knocked. He threw a pick six, but during that play, he got a concussion. they didn't make the play. He didn't play in that playoff game against the Bengals in 2022, but then last year he had the game against the Chiefs, where they lost. But like I said, this year's the best year we've seen Lamar Jackson throw the football. Just in terms of downfield throws, just running the ball. It just seems like he's a more complete quarterback because he's gotten a lot more experience and he's played in those playoff games. I think they will win this game. I just think Lamar Jackson just is on a roll right now, and I think it's going to take a whole lot for the Bills to take care of him. I think the Bills' best friend will be the weather. I really do. Now, although Baltimore is really cold too, it gets really cold there. But, just with Buffalo in the wintertime, you don't know what kind of conditions you're going to get. So I think the weather will be the biggest factor in that game. But then also having a guy like Derrick Henry. When you have a stud, I think the reason why I'm picking the Ravens over the Bills is because as good as James Cook is not the type of guys who will take a game completely over. Derrick Henry can. And it's shown, all right? And they threw us great this year and also the last game. Where it was the Derrick Henry show. Lamar Jackson played a good game, but they just kept giving the ball to Derrick Henry because who's going to tackle a 6'3", 240-pound running back that runs a 4.5 flat? You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to have to go with the Ravens on that one. Houston, let's go with the other game in the AFC, Houston and Kansas City.
I think Kansas City wins this one. Houston's been too inconsistent for me, especially on offense. I think Kansas City runs away with this one pretty easily.
Yeah, same here. I'll do say this. I think the game would be close because that's how Kansas City's won these type of games. I think they're gonna, the Texans are gonna play a great game because I think you have a great quarterback in C.J. Stroud, and I think that it's just gonna be a close game because I think Houston is a good team and they can compete with Kansas City, but Houston does have a few injuries, and I just think Kansas City is gonna win because they're the Chiefs. The Chiefs, like Pat McAfee says, the Chiefs are the Chiefs, and they will play Baltimore in the AFC Championship game. Okay, how about the Commanders versus the Detroit Lions? I know Detroit's been playing some great football despite suffering some injuries to some key players. But the Commanders have been playing some great football as well. They've won a lot of close games. Jane Daniels, despite being a rookie, he's going to be the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. But then also, you can make a case that he could be a guy you could put in the top 10 as quarterback. I know it's a rookie, but that's how he's been playing. And, the Commanders have won a lot of games because of Jane Daniels. Can the Commanders pull off the upset in Detroit?
I think you could also make a case that even Dan Quinn could probably be your favorite for Coach of the Year as well, just with what he's been able to do in year one. And I think all of that goes down to who do you have on your offense? Well, you hired Cliff Kingsbury in the offseason to pair him along with Jaden Daniels. And that's the perfect offensive system for him. Let's think about this, Grant. Who has Cliff Kingsbury worked with ever since he's been in the NFL, especially with mobile quarterbacks? Well, he worked with Case Keenum and company whenever he was at Houston. He worked with Johnny Manziel. He worked with Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech. He worked with Kyler Murray for a little bit at Arizona, and now here he is, arguably with one of with probably the second or third best quarterback that he's gotten to experience right now as a rookie in Jaden Daniels. And that all goes down to his coaching philosophy and what he has been able to do throughout this season. Cliff Kingsbury, to me, is one of the bright offensive minds in all of college football. I think there's no question about it, how good he has been ever since he got back to Washington, and just the overall way that Washington has responded, knowing that you had a young quarterback coming in. Expectations were pretty low to start the year, and here you go with a brand new general manager in Adam Peters, who was an assistant general manager at the 49ers for a little bit. I think he could potentially be executive of the year at this point. Look, they've had a great offseason. Not only just getting Jaden Daniels, but also getting a guy like Johnny Newton, who's had a pretty solid first year, especially in the interior. I mean, you surrounded yourself with so much talent. And I know that a lot of guys get overlooked, like Scary Terry McLaurin with KJ Osborne, with Luke McCaffrey. Heck, even the tight end room has been pretty impressive with John Bates, Zach Ertz, and Ben Sinnott. And for them to get the 6th seed and compete in a division with Philly and with Dallas, it's impressive to see what they were able to do this year. And it just goes to show you the testament of what 1 year can do for a franchise. And I think the ceiling is very high in the near future for Washington. I think if they hadn't had that 3-game skid, you would argue that they could have been one of the number one seed in the NFC as well, and could have contended for one of the best spots in the NFC. But this one's going to be tighter than what people think. I think this is going to be one. They don't win this one. It may come down to a field goal, though, and I think Detroit, with the experience that they have, they end up winning this football game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you there. I think Detroit. I think the Commanders will make this game interesting. I think when you have a guy like Jaden Daniels, and I saw this at LSU, covering LSU. Like anytime you have a guy like Jaden Daniels, you have a great chance of winning. And you surround him with the talent like he has at Washington, your chances of winning you just go even higher. But I just think that when you're going to Detroit, Detroit's a 15-2 team. Detroit has won games despite his injuries. You have one of the best coaches right now with Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is going to get his guys ready to play. Also, Detroit is now a very tough place to play. It wasn't a very tough place to play because the Lions weren't very good. But when the Lions are good, and you have a city like Detroit that loves the sports teams, like they truly love its sports teams, and when they're good, they are ferocious. And Ford Field has now become a very tough place to play. I just think that for Jane Daniels, it will be, now I'll say this. He did play in the SEC. So what he's going to see in Detroit is something that he's used to seeing, especially when you play at a place like LSU. But it's a pros game. And so I'm wondering how Jane Daniels will respond to early adversity in a tough playoff game, in a tough environment in the NFL against grown men, right? Jane Daniels, something down the line. Now, Jane Daniels is a big-time player, a guy who's led the Commanders to 4 game-winning drives. 3 of those were him throwing a touchdown pass, by the way. So it's more like they were field goals. He's led them to victory. But I just think that Detroit, I think just right now, I think Detroit's going to be too much for the Commanders. I think they pull it off in a very close one.
I think what's impressive, too, is just I think that Chicago game was a significant one for both franchises. You look at what Washington was able to do. You win 12 games, most you've had since 91, since you last won the Super Bowl. You end up getting your first playoff win since 05. Chicago, after that one, if you remember back in October, Grant, they started 4-2. You go into the bye, you look like you're about to get a big win in Washington. Then you give up that late Hail Mary. You end up losing 10 of your last 11. Go on a 10-game losing streak, and you fire your coach. You have all these horrible, horrible things that happen near the end of the season. You lost 3 straight games, all of which came down to the last play. And that's basically what defines Chicago's year. But don't be surprised, honestly, if Washington manages to pull the upset. I would definitely not be surprised with how Washington has performed on offense recently. I think, to me, they are one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now, and I think they're one of the hottest young teams right now that could be a future Detroit in the making.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, really, I think a lot of credit has to go to Dan Quinn as well. Of course, a lot of these guys were on the team last year, but they're good players. They have good players to watch, but I felt like they just needed, of course, the right ownership, which they have now, with Josh Harris taking over for a really bad owner in Dan Snyder. You have the right front office put in place, but then also Dan Quinn's a guy. He's a pretty successful coach. He led the Falcons to the Super Bowl. I mean, the Falcons were a perennial playoff team under Dan Quinn. I mean, Dan Quinn's not some like a guy who just came out of nowhere. Dan Quinn's a very successful head coach in the NFL. If you look at his record, I mean, he has a winning record, 55-47. I mean, the only 2 losing seasons he had were his last 2 seasons in Atlanta, and that's when the team got older and they had to go on a full rebuild. So I mean, so he's a very good head coach. I think a lot, and he's a great defensive mind as well. However, I just think the Commanders are, I think the Lions, even with their injuries, are going to be a little bit too much for the Commanders. But I think the Commanders are in the right path as a franchise, especially when you have a guy like Jane Daniels and you're surrounded with guys that will help him. But not only that, help in the team in its whole will win games. So I think that's very important for the Commanders moving forward, especially in the division like the NFC East, which is a very tough division. Although the Giants are right now, but it's still a very tough division. The last playoff game, the Rams and the Eagles. Who you got?
Give me the Eagles in this one. I think with a healthy Jalen Hurts right now, I think they're getting hot down the stretch of the year. Just give me them in the win. I think they'll be heading back to the NFC title.
Yeah, I think same here. I think the Eagles too. I think the Eagles have got this. I think the Rams, I think it's kind of like we're kind of in the end of the Rams. I think they're going to go into rebuild mode pretty soon just because it's just it's going to be just tough for the Rams to be a team like the Eagles who are younger and have already experienced the highs and the lows of being a great just a great playoff team. So I just think the Eagles are going to win this one. I think it's going to be the end of the Rams, and I think they're going to go on a full rebuild after this year. But Lucas, just before I let you go, any overall thoughts about the college and pro football season as a whole? Because we only got a couple more weeks because the national championship is next Monday on the 20th. And then of course you got the Super Bowl, a week and a half into the month of February. I mean, we only got a few more weeks of this, man. And it's kind of scary because time just keeps moving up pretty fast.
Do me a favor, Grant, play that video that I got right there. This is a message to every NFL team right now. You need to draft this dude. I watched him in person. You'll know who I'm talking about once this one shows up. Can you draft him, please? Can somebody please draft Harold Fannin? This dude is a freaking monster. 6'4", 235 pounds, and he's doing that.
Oh, man.
How many tight ends do you see doing that, Mr. Sachere?
Not many. If you got you doing that, there's not many guys who can do that, especially at that size. I mean, especially nowadays, you need athletic tight ends. Of course, you need tight ends that can block. I mean, there's always going to be blocking tight ends. That's what tight ends are really known for. But now, with the modern NFL, you're going to need guys who can block. Mason Taylor's a perfect example of that, right? You got to need guys who can not only catch the ball, but can block extremely well on the run. That's very crucial. That's always been crucial for football and the game of football, especially at the NFL. But you need guys who are vertical threats down the field. Not guys who can catch a pass in the short field, but guys who are vertical threats down the field. Kind of like a Travis Kelce. You get the gist.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, L.A., New Orleans, draft him. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave it at that. Somebody draft Harold Fannin. He better be a first-round draft pick. If he's not, it's a crime. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think the Saints need to draft anybody. I think stay away from quarterback, but the Saints draft anybody you want, but draft the right player. I mean, you got to focus on building up your line and then also make sure you have skill players because right now you got to go full rebuild mode. Like, there's no more, we got a chance here. We just need a few more players. No. You need to tear the whole thing down if I'm the Saints. But anyway, this is Lucas Hill of the College Football Nightcap. He also is the color analyst for Southeastern Sports. He's still got 3 more semesters at Southeastern before he goes in the professional world, like me, and of course our good friend Jason Lejeune, who also is a Southeastern alum and was in a similar capacity that Lucas is in right now. Lucas also, was originally with SEC Unfiltered, where he gave a lot of unfiltered takes and really gave some interesting takes. And you really appreciate his takes, and I really appreciate him having on. I know it's kind of getting late right now. It's 10:20. It's currently 10:27 as we're filming this at night. But Lucas, thanks so much for hopping on and discussing college football and the NFL with me.
Grant, good to see you again, my friend. Have a great rest of the week, brother.
Yeah, no problem. You can follow him on Twitter at Lucas_Hill23 on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. Make sure to give him a follow because he always has a great takes, and you can also see his content as well in regards to college football and whatever other sport that Lucas may talk about. Lucas, thanks again, and we'll see you later. And you guys have a great rest of your weekend.